This article is about the ethics involved in fundraising. Specifically, the nonprofits being discussed in this article are universities. The issue is how to deal with donors when ethical issues arise. The article discusses a study done by The Chronicle regarding university ethics policies in relation to donors, specifically whether the universities have policies already in place or whether they have to improve on the policies. The Chronicle interviewed a small number of colleges and universities and found that they had policies that clearly stated to donors that the donors do not dictate who teaches or who is granted tenure. Additionally, the policy stated that donors could not set conditions that violate the academic freedom of the university. However, the article specifies that the policies only briefly discuss the morality of the gift's origins, but that the policies did not go into specifics. The article then details a specific instance where a university did not do an ethics check on the origin of one of the donor's gifts. It was Brown University, and the donor had a business that produced the riot equipment and tear gas used by police at the US-Mexico border. In response to students finding out, there were protests, so much so that Brown revised their policy. The policy states that they will not accept gifts if the funds or property were not acquired legally, or if the intended purpose or association with the donor could inflict damage on the university's standing or integrity or runs counter to university values. The policy additionally conveys that Brown will not accept gifts anonymously for the purpose of protecting the university's reputation or disguising a gift. The article then discussed an interview with the Vice Chancellor for External Relations for the University of Texas, who at first said that fundraising decisions should be guided by the words legal, ethical, and moral, but then proceeded to say that the university will ultimately make decisions based on their best interest and whether it benefits the institution. The author of the article ends on a pessimistic note, relaying that the need for large donations will forever be too strong for any university institution to institute a serious policy change regarding any questionable morality of the donor gifts. This article is related to this week's readings on fundraising ethics from chapters 35 and 36 of Achieving Excellence in Fundraising, abbreviated here AEF. In this week's readings, AEF discusses that there are 3 steps for considering ethical dilemmas. 1. All decisions must take into account and reflect a concern for the interests and well-being of all shareholders. 2. Ethical values and principles always take precedence over non-ethical ones. And 3. It is ethically proper to violate an ethical principle only when it is clearly necessary to advance another true ethical principle, which according to the decision-maker's conscience will produce the greatest balance of good in the long run. Not instituting a policy with regard to the ethics of where the donor's money is coming from does not appear to be clearly necessary to advance another true ethical principle. The reason is because the university wants the big donor's money, not that they are trying to be ethically sound on another front. Thus, I think that by not evaluating the morality of where the money came from, universities' fundraising staff are violating certain ethical principles. The reading further says that as a fundraising professional, one must develop the ability to make ethical decisions to solve ethical dilemmas. I think what Brown University did by altering its policy in favor of doing due diligence on gift origins is a perfect example of this. The reading in AEF also discussed how a donor cannot impose restrictions on a gift that inappropriately constrain the duty of care owed by the board of directors over the use of the gift. Additionally, the reading discussed that state and federal courts require subjective and objective tests for the charitable gifts. Applicable here is the objective test, which requires that the gift does not include any quid pro quo returned to the donor in exchange for this gift. The article showed how universities follow this by explicitly telling donors that they cannot set conditions that violate the academic freedom of the university, as well as telling donors that they do not dictate who teaches or is getting tenure. Additionally, AEF discusses the relationship between the donor and the organization. and that the organization must constantly remind themselves that the benefits should only accrue to the organization. I think this relates to what the Vice Chancellor at University of Texas was ultimately emphasizing in the article, that the university will make decisions regarding what is ultimately in their best interest. Clearly, this will change given the circumstances. For example, a university is likely happy to receive donations from an unethical donor, that is, until students start protesting the donation source. At that moment, the positive benefits of using that donor turn sour, and receiving that money turns into bad press and a public relations disaster. Thus, the university will likely change its ways to avoid more negative press. While that may seem pessimistic, I think the author also offers a pessimistic view on the subject, and specifically whether organizations like universities will actually instill policies regarding ethical gift origins in the future. I agree with this author. For example, the true detriment to the organization arises out of the public response to the donor, not from the actual donor itself. Thus, the organization likely wouldn't turn away a donor whose money comes from an ethically unsound place unless there was public outcry. However, because of this, I do think that the author is being a little too pessimistic, especially at the university level, where student protests are commonplace. I think students can hold the universities accountable, assuming that the universities are being honest and appropriately disclosing their donors. However, that being said, I think the article does not touch on some important implications of including a provision about gift origins. Specifically, where does the university draw the line with what is considered unethical? And who decides what is to be deemed unethical, seeing as clearly people have different moral compasses? Obviously, getting money from a donor who is creating weapons used in the US-Mexico border dispute appears unethical. But what about something less controversial, like having the donor be SeaWorld? There was definitely some public outcry about Blackfish. However, since Blackfish came out, SeaWorld has claimed it has improved its practices. So, is the university acting immorally by now accepting money from them? I think while in theory the practice seems easy to implement when discussing very controversial topics, I think in actuality it may be a difficult practice to follow when approaching more gray area subjects. Maybe the university fundraising committee could create and then follow a set of ethical guidelines regarding the origins of the gifts. In conclusion, universities should take into account the ethics of donor origins before they accept a gift in the future.